Welcome to the Subconscious Elements podcast, a podcast where we talk all things spirituality, whether it's myths, legends, books, movies, relationships, life. And today we'll be talking about the movie Dune Part 1 that came out a couple years ago. And I'll kick it off to my co-host, Tori.
So in Dune, we follow the main character, Paul Atreides, who is the heir of the House Atreides. And this story begins with his family in a planet called Caladan, who later become the rulers of a world called Arrakis, which is a desert planet, which currently is the only place in the universe that has the most valuable resource, which is known as spice. As his family gets betrayed and there's a lot of political intrigue, Paul and his mother find themselves lost in the desert. And through their journey, they meet the Fremen people who are natives of Arrakis. And through their journey, they realize that Paul could be the prophesized Messiah for the Fremen people.
One of the biggest turning points of the movie, the Emperor gives, Atreides, the control over Arrakis. And there's like a big scene at the very beginning of the movie where the Emperor sends like his personal messenger, I guess courtier is what you'd call them, right? To deliver the message. And they make a comment of like how expensive and significant this trip was just to tell them that they're going to take charge of Arrakis, instead of, like, they had already made arrangements, but he sent a personal messenger to make it official. And you can already tell like some type of foreshadowing there, as it's like weird that they would do that. And so they go to Arrakis, and at Arrakis, the original owners of the planet, the
Harkonnen.
The Harkonnens attack them, and it becomes apparent that it was purposely set up by the Emperor to weaken House Atreides, so that they would not be able to rise up in power. Like, essentially, House Atreides was acquiring power and influence, and the Emperor didn't like that, so he turns Arrakis over to Atreides, thereby weakening them because they're going to have to divert their forces there. They're going to leave their home planet to take over this new planet, and that opens up an opportunity for the Harkonnens to essentially murder.
The planet's very dangerous and hard to adapt to and takes a lot of knowledge and time, so it's almost immediately seen as like a suicide mission.
Right. And so, yeah, we wanted to break this movie down because there's many different themes and philosophical and spiritual concepts like interwoven within the storyline. And it's overall a great movie. It's a crazy debate on whether I think which is better, like Star Wars or Dune. Like, there's a lot of buzz about which one people like more. But yeah, so is there something that you want to start with to talk about, Tori?
Yeah, so the biggest theme that I took away from this movie was the hero's journey and the chosen one archetype. And this is definitely portrayed through the movie with a little bit of a twist, because Paul is very worried about the consequences of becoming the hero. So he goes through the classic archetype of living in a comfortable world and not really wanting to accept his destiny, being presented with the option of rising in power and becoming who he's meant to be. And you can see that he's torn between accepting this fate. And he goes through his training, doesn't really take it as serious as he needs to. And he's not only doing physical training, but he's also the son of a Bene Gesserit, which the Bene Gesserit they're like a secretive order of women in the galaxy that have powers in the spiritual realm and can use their powers to control humans. And so he has this, and he also has the heir to the throne. So he's kind of torn between two different realities, and it's just a lot for him. And you can see him struggle with that, with internal struggles, and eventually he becomes one with his destiny, and as the classic story goes. But yeah, towards the end, he's using the spice to see possible futures, and he can see potential like war that spreads throughout the entire galaxy. So it's kind of traditional, but it's not left on a good note. So leaves you wanting more.
Yeah, one of the awesome quotes that's said in the very beginning of the movie, his dad is talking to him. They're like going through, I think it's like a graveyard, right? Or like a burial place. And he's like, I guess, honoring or connecting with his ancestors. And Paul brings up how he isn't sure he even wants to be the Duke or the leader. And Duke Leto, the dad, says something along the lines of, great men don't seek leadership, they are called to it. And it's this idea that when you're truly meant to do something or be in a position of leadership, you're put in that situation. And that, you kind of want to be wary of people who seek leadership, because a lot of times it kind of leads to this idea of like wanting it for personal gain. But if you're called to it, or the situation calls upon you to do it, that's more seen as like a noble situation, because the situation itself like needs you, the people need you. And it essentially showcases that you don't have like some personal desire for having that position. And, we see this a lot in today's age, where like it used to be that the political positions would be held by, it was like a volunteer position. Essentially, you did it because it needed to be done. But now, since we have like a race and there's huge financial gain, now we start to see like where this corruption comes into, because now you see that there's people running to be president just because of it'll make them millionaires. It'll increase their influence. Like there's selfish gain to being in political power these days, and you could argue that that's what's wrong with our government today. But if it could go back to like this idea where, because like originally you're not supposed to be able to profit from these positions, but they do. And because they're able to profit, now you get, it's like, personal desires. You get personal desires mixed up in there. And then now you're getting not what the people want, but what the individuals want. And every individual wants to increase their net worth, make more money, gain more power, gain more influence. And I just thought that was a powerful quote by Paul's dad.
Yeah, for sure. That shows that he is on the right path, that he's not in it for anything other than the benefit of the Fremen. And you can see that like when he lands on the planet Arrakis, he is seen to like naturally adapt to the customs of the planet without being told anything. So a lot of people are catching on and kind of already calling him the Messiah, like under their breath, before he even knows. So like, for example, they have these still suits that they created to preserve water and moisture. And he already knew how to put it on before having any instruction. Like he adapted to the ways of walking on the sand, not to disturb the sandworms very naturally. And yeah.
One of the things I like about that is like this idea that the youth downloads information at a more at a quicker rate and almost like way more seamless than someone who's older. And it kind of just, the science behind it is that their brains are not developed all the way, so they're just more in what they call like a plastic state. Like it's quicker to adapt to the situation and information, right? So like a part of our brain's intelligence is its ability to create new neural pathways in accordance with new information. But as we get older, our brain loses that ability to adapt as quickly. But when you're young, your brain isn't all the way hardened, it isn't all the way developed. So the youth kind of has this edge when it comes to downloading information. And you could also even argue that, like, obviously as you get older, you get a lot more problems. So you have more of life to think about, right? Like whether it's, your job, your wife, your family, like a bunch of different things consume your mind, whereas the youth can literally just think about what they want to think about. So they can spend many, many hours thinking about something that they're interested in, as opposed to someone with a day full of responsibilities. They can only think about these extra things only so often. And in the movie, right, so he has like this natural advantage both in fighting, in the way that he adapts to the new planet, his leadership abilities, his what else was, like the way that he studies. Like he has like all day to study. That's like his main job, is to study and be a good leader. So and then later on he takes a fight and does really well in the fight as well. And in jiu-jitsu you see the same thing. Like these kids these days, man, they pick up things so fast, it's like mind-blowing. And so I really like how it's kind of like woven into this story as well. And it's like, it's not just, the fact that, as we're older, we kind of lose like this supernatural ability, but it just reminds me that you can really set your youth up for success. Like if you can teach the youth, not just yours, but the youth in general, a life lesson that might have taken you forever to learn, they can integrate that at a much quicker rate and then do a lot more with it than what you've done. And so I think that in general is just like super powerful to know. And I'm super excited to teach our little ones stuff. But it's one of my greatest passions in jiu-jitsu is like teaching the young kids, because they take it and then they just run with it. And you're like, yeah, I didn't learn that till I was a black belt, and here you are as a white belt already doing it,
Yeah, the unburdened mind. Their minds are technically vibrating at a different level. So I believe it's like theta. And so, like you said, that there's neuroplasticity there. They're just able to download information. But also, as you're older, you are able to tap into these states of mind through like mindfulness meditation. So it's not completely like, oh, well, can't do that anymore. It's like, well, you can slow down your mind through practices, so you should not be discouraged in that way. Yeah, just remembering to like slow down and think while you're doing stuff instead of just robotically moving through life. But yeah, also when the fight scene happened, right when they first met the Fremen, all of the crew were debating like, oh, well, we only saved them from the sandworm because we're going to harvest their water from their bodies, because water is a very valuable resource. It's like the only resource that matters because it's so scarce there on that planet. And so the leader of the crew, he stops them and he's analyzing the situation. And he says, well, the boy, he's young, he's healthy, we can still teach him, he can learn to fight, he can learn our ways. But the woman, she's older, she's not going to be able to learn. And so he's basically like leading on that they're going to kill the mother because she's older and unable to adapt to the planet, or less likely to be able to adapt. And so that starts like a fight between the crew leader and the woman ends up besting him in the fight. And he was like, well, why didn't you mention that you could fight? He's like, well, the conversation was cut short. And so then they're both basically just accepted into the crew immediately because of their skill sets. And then, of course, the fight scene happens because one of the characters in the crew, he doesn't accept them to be allowed to join them. And so he's already previously had like visions of this man. And the Bene Gesserit came to him within the vision as a voice saying that he was a friend and that he had much to learn in the desert. And he ends up taking his life. And in doing so, this kind of symbolizes death and rebirth, because the Bene Gesserit, they said, in order for you to become who you're meant to be, which is the Kwisatz Haderach, Paul Atreides must die. And in the vision, he didn't really know, like, does that mean I'm dying? Like, he didn't know how to interpret the situation, but it just, it's better said as that version of him had to die. And it died with that battle and him taking a first life.
Yeah, I thought the entire fight scene was super dope. Jameis came to him in the vision and pretty much like accepted to be his guy, like a friend that's gonna show him the ways of the desert and show him the ways of the Fremen. And so you think he's gonna be like a helper of some sort, but then they end up fighting. He essentially forces a fight on Paul. Like, again, he doesn't agree with Stilgar accepting them and challenges to fight the woman, and they say it's not allowed. So he's like, well, I'll fight her champion, which ends up being Paul. And no one gives Paul a chance. They think he's just going to die. But in the battle, he bests Jameis like multiple times before actually killing him. Like, gets a blade to his throat and says, do you yield? And this makes Jameis very angry because essentially, he should have just been killed. But instead, he has to he's alive knowing that he doesn't even stand a chance because Paul is struggling with the idea of actually killing him. So essentially, gets the blade to his throat multiple times. And it sends Jameis in this fit of anger where he's screaming. And eventually, Paul just kills him. Eventually, he makes the right move, stabs him in the back, and kills him. And it's this huge moment where Paul takes on the new role of this new person he's supposed to be. And it goes back to Jameis telling him that he's going to be a friend and show him the way. He essentially showed him. Because there's this moment where Stilgar says, is he messing with us? What is he doing? And his mom says he's never killed a man before. And so essentially Jameis takes the sacrifice for him, lets him kill him so that Paul can rise up and be the person he's supposed to be and be accepted with the Fremen. Because he's not going to do well unless he's willing to kill and fight, because that's how the Fremen live. And when he comes to him in the vision, you can tell it's almost like a spirit realm. So it's like the spirit of Jameis. And to me, it kind of just reminds me of almost like karma and soul contracts and what we come here to do. And it a lot of times, it even reminds me that people do things to you, not against you, but you could even argue for you, right? You might perceive it in this reality as oh, this person did something messed up or against me. But if you take the right lesson from it and grow from it or learn to not make the same mistake, then if you could see that on a spiritual side of it, they're actually helping you. I don't know. It's pretty trippy to me, and I think it's super cool. And it also like the idea too is Jameis is an older, seasoned warrior, and they were like, "Oh, Jameis is a good warrior. Pretty much you don't stand a chance." And Paul just easily bests him, even though it's his first time in combat. And that just kind of goes back to that youth thing. I'm telling you, I teach white belts, and the young white belts, they're so good, it's mind blowing. It doesn't even make sense. And I mean, they're teenagers. And so when I was a white belt as a grown man, I felt like I was still really good. I would be black belts as a white belt, but mostly just because I was bigger and stronger. But these kids are just they move fast. The same move doesn't work on them more than once. They can figure it out. They're like, oh, he got me like this. Okay, I'm going to figure it out. I know those little suckers are going home and watching YouTube. But yeah, just the youth, and then how Jameis is doing it to help him. I felt like it was just an awesome scene, and definitely leaves you wanting more, because after it's ends right after that pretty much. They get accepted into the movie ends, and you're like, I want to know what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I thought that the movie was longer, honestly, because we watched it multiple times, and I was like, yeah, when they meet the Fremen, it's only like halfway through the movie. And it was the end of the movie, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
dang. But we watched part 2 also, so I think that kind of like morphs together in my mind.
Yeah. Another really cool part, since we're talking about Jameis, he comes earlier in the movie with just a voice. And it's when they go into the storm to escape the Harkonnen. So right after they escape from the main battle where everyone dies, I think this is maybe, right after they link up with the person who's supposed to wager both sides, or she's supposed to watch the takeover of Arrakis. And I forget what her official title is, but she takes them to a hidden location, but the Harkonnen find them there and start slaughtering everybody. And that's where Aquaman dies. I forget his name. But so it's like a huge battle scene, and they essentially escape. What's his name?
Duncan.
Duncan, yeah, that's where Duncan dies. But they escape in one of the Dragonfly helicopters, and the way that they avoid getting captured by the Harkonnen is going straight into the storm. And there's a huge moment where they're struggling and they don't know what they're supposed to do, and his mom starts going over this awesome prayer about fear is the mind killer to calm her, because she's like super nervous, like the storm is pretty much destroying the aircraft that they're in. And Jameis comes to Paul in like almost like a vision scenario and says one of my favorite all-time quotes, but he says, "The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience." And that's one of my favorite all-time quotes, because it just reminds me that you can't figure anything out. There's nothing to be thought about. You can't think your way out of anything. You can't think your way out of life. Like, you can't figure it all out inside your mind. You have to literally live through it. And that reminds me so much about jiu-jitsu, or jiu-jitsu really helps me understand it, I should say, in a sense that, like, when you hear people talk about fighting that have never fought, it doesn't make any sense. Like, they talk in nonsense. And almost everyone does. Almost every male thinks that they can fight, but they absolutely can't. And when you hear their version of what they think would happen, it's mind-blowing and hilarious. But once you go through it, you realize like just how different it is than the plan that you made up in your mind. And I think that not just in fighting and jiu-jitsu, but I think that happens in everyday life, where we come up with these crazy plans about what might happen, and oh, this will happen, or this conversation is going to play out this way. And it almost never goes out that way, right? But most of the time, we don't actually even reconcile that it never happened the way we imagined it to happen. We just go on planning the next thing. But back to what he was saying is that, there's nothing to be figured out. You just have to go with it. And there's nothing, you can't figure it out by stopping it. You just have to go with the flow. And in that moment, he realizes to just like let go and let the storm take over. And I guess they're like so high up in the storm that they're just like carried by the winds. And so, I just really enjoy that part and that quote, because it reminds me that, like, don't get caught up in your head. Don't get caught up in the voices. Don't get caught up in the planning and how things should go. Just go with it. Go with life and accept the circumstances you're in and move with it.
Yeah, that's like the story of the bison moving through the snow, how they don't avoid the storm or try to run from it. They just move straight through. And in that way, they're able to move through the storm quicker than trying to avoid her. Yeah, and that storm scene... Oh, yeah. Just like practicing non-attachment in your life. And like you said, with the way that things plan out, because it pretty much 99.9% of the time will not plan out that way. And in fixating in the way that things will turn out, you limit the possibilities of how things can turn out. So by opening up your mind and just allowing life to come in all of its various shapes and forms, then you allow yourself to have greater potential, greater possibilities.
For sure. What else you got?
I was going to talk about the ecological and environmental themes throughout the movie and how they can relate to the problems that we see on Earth and that we've seen through history. Because that's one of the main things that the original writer, Frank Herbert, was interested in when he was writing the novel. And he wrote this novel in 1965. He is currently deceased. Denis Villeneuve is the director of the current movies that we have. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to see Frank Herbert before he died. So he was just greatly inspired by the stories whenever he was a kid. And he made it his life's mission to recreate it in a movie. And he said that's like his biggest accomplishment in his life. But yeah, one of the main themes that Frank Herbert was interested in was like the environmental things. And he wanted to show the extremes of possibilities whenever worlds take things too far. And so we could see this with the extraction of spice and how external forces are coming onto a planet and they're extracting spice without thinking about the long-term effects or the cost. And what that might mean for the native people. And we've seen this in history time and time again, where colonialism happens, where people come through, they want gold or they want oil, and they take that at whatever cost and leave the people in disarray most of the time.
Yeah. It's even interesting how not the situation, but the environmental factors, essentially the state that the planet is in, the desert has shaped their religion. And if you really study religion, you can see how the idea of each religion was formed based on the state of the people, the mind state of the people when the religion was formed. Like essentially, religion is essentially just an idea that won out over other ideas based on the realities of the people, the realities being experienced by the people. One of the ones I can give as like an example would be, Christianity was first developed and came to popularity through slaves of the Roman Empire. And the Romans believed at the time that the only thing that mattered was the here and now. And if you could imagine that being a slave for the Roman Empire, that's not very appealing. But if you could believe that there was a way to have a better life in the afterlife, and that also everyone was the same in God's eyes, right? If you weren't a Roman citizen, that would be very appealing. And it just kind of talks about how Christianity won over other ideas, other religions, because when the Roman Empire was taken over, there were dozens and dozens of different religions. And Christianity just took hold and took power because of how powerful of an idea it was. And it kind of just like shows how it came to rise through the situations of the people. And then if you look at the people in Arrakis, like a lot of their religion and the way that they believe and think all is centered around the way that they're forced to live and cope with the desert.
Yeah, it was ecological power is definitely a thing. They've adapted over generations of people to live in their environment, and they've mastered weather patterns, like the fragile balance of the planet. And they've have like a certain relationship with the sandworms. Like they respect them, but also they learn how to ride them, and they can use that in certain scenarios, which the sandworms are these creatures they create the spice for the planet. So without them, they would not have spice, and then their planet wouldn't be valuable. So they know to respect them, and they learn to ride them. But it was just saying that these people have the most power because they're most in tune with the planet, and they know how to survive. They've created like the still suits and all kinds of things. And I thought it was really interesting how they have so whenever someone dies, they keep the water and they actually put it in this like huge pool, and they have I don't know exactly what they call it, but it's like where they have the water and they see that as like their soul. So it's like a body of water that's like full of souls. So I thought that was super interesting because they could just use the water for themselves selfishly, but instead they have this huge well of water when they're in a very scarce environment that needs water. But they'd prefer to preserve the soul of the person rather than to extract it for their own selfish needs.
Yeah, the whole water thing is creepy because they like suck the water out of all the bodies and reuse water, and they like drink their own sweat and spit and stuff. That's pretty interesting. But if you lived in the desert.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that the original writer he wanted to portray was how extreme environments can be. And even so, in our planet currently, there's people without water or very scarce water or just not clean water. And we also have super arid environments where there's deserts and things like that that are inhabitable. So I thought that was interesting to imagine.
Yeah, it kind of gives off that one movie like Mad Max type vibes.
Yeah, like The Last Survivors.
Yeah.
The hardest people of all.
And then one of the things, so we kind of jumped all the way to the end about the fight, but in the very beginning, Paul shows that he disagrees with his mom and the Bene Gesserit because he finds out that, just like how we were talking about earlier, how the Bene Gesserit is a servant to the emperor, but they have like their own plans and their own wants and needs, and that they have like this grand plan for everything, but on the side they have like their own plan for everything. And I mean, who knows, that could have been planted by, because the person who told him that, I'm pretty sure, was the doctor, right? And the doctor's then the one who ended up betraying them, but essentially like kind of plants this seed into Paul, like not to trust the Bene Gesserit. And then right after, he goes through the test with the Bene Gesserit, which was a dope scene where he has to conquer fear, and that's where that first part of fear is the mind killer that his mom starts praying about. That's where that first kind of comes in. But he sees as they enter in Arrakis that the Bene Gesserit have already been there and like laid the groundwork for the prophecy that he's the Messiah. And he disagrees with it and doesn't really agree that they should be doing that. Like, they're essentially taking advantage of the native people there to use them for their own ways, for their own plans. And his mom is already, like, I guess you could say, like, indoctrinated, right? She's definitely a Bene Gesserit, so she kind of disregards his skepticism of it. But all throughout the movie, you can see that, Paul doesn't want to be a pawn to be played by the Bene Gesserit. And from part 1 and 2, you can see that it, from what I understand, it ends up happening anyway. But he is definitely super skeptical of being the Messiah, being the one of the prophecy. Like, these people believe it, like, with their soul and heart. And so I wonder, like, how long had the Bene Gesserit been planting that, or if they essentially, like, use their voice to... I mean, I guess it would have to have been over a long period of time that they were, like...
They said it, but I don't remember.
Again, just, like, how long they had been planting those seeds of the prophecy onto the native people, the Fremen, so that they believe that Paul Atreides is the Messiah, influencing the native people about this prophecy for thousands of years. And so they, like, pretty much fighting for it tooth and nail at this point, or at least the population is split. Like, some people believe it, some people don't. But Paul himself, ends up being the... what was it called again?
Lisan al-Gaib.
Yeah, the Lisan al-Gaib. I thought you said it was something else. Oh, that's the one. That's the Bene Gesserit's version of it. But so he's supposed to be the Lisan al-Gaib, but he's even skeptical and low-key believes that they're all being manipulated into believing it to further the Bene Gesserit's. And then later in the movie, he has a vision of the Holy War he starts, and he's like super angry about it. Like, he's angry at his mom and like yells at her. And it kind of goes into this concept. I was reading about it a little bit. Obviously, I don't fully understand it, but it was just saying how, obviously this is a trope or one of the classic archetypal stories of a person from a wealthy nation or a better to-do nation coming over and hooking up with a woman of the native people and then leading the native people or saving them from some type of catastrophe. It was like related to Pocahontas, but then it kind of goes into this idea that this is actually a deconstruction of that archetype in a sense that Paul Atreides isn't a savior, that he's actually an enemy because he essentially starts the Holy War. And there's this idea that it's a warning story against charismatic leaders, and that it kind of ties into like things that have happened in America where super charismatic presidents have gotten us into wars where you kind of just like believe what they say because they're super popular. And we see that now, right? And it's like, these people, they'll do whatever it takes to win your hearts and mind, and then they're essentially making profit off whatever war that they're peddling or dragging on. And so it's hard to wonder, right? Because the original creator is no longer alive, right? So it's like, what was he making this about? And I wonder where these people get this information from. But yeah, it's like when you watch the movie, you feel like he's the hero. Like coming out of Dune 2, I was like, I am Nisan Al-Gaim, but when you learn more about the whole storyline, you're like, damn, maybe he's not the hero. But I mean, I guess it's like him or the Harkonnens, right? So.
Yeah. I mean, you want to think that it's like for the greater good, that if he weren't to show up, then how much more damage would the Harkonnens do? Like they could just destroy that entire planet and then move on to the next, So he is disturbing the current crisis that's existing already. That had nothing to do with him or his family. So in a sense, he's acting as like a stop and a refresh. So he's like recreating a reality that he knows is possible. And the same with the Bene Gesserit, like they're getting a little distorted, and it's been like time after time where they're being unchecked. And so he's like proceeding as a check, like, hey, well, wait, what are you guys doing? And like, maybe there's a better way to do it. So that's kind of how I see it. Because, you can feel that his energy is like good. It doesn't seem like he's doing it for distorted reasons. Like he even mentions it. He's like not there for spice. He's not there for money. He's there for the people. But, that's what all the enemies say. So who knows? I mean, isn't there like 4 parts to the series? So we've only seen 2.
Gotta read the book.
Yeah, but towards the second part, you can see like a turning point in his character where it seems like his energy shifts. But in the beginning, it just seems like he's just there for the good of everyone. But yeah, I also wanted to talk about the spice in and of itself and how it's used to extend life. So it actually can like extend the longevity of your life. And also it can enhance perception. So they're able to see like potential futures or into the future. And then also it's used by the guild navigators to basically dilate time and use it to move spacecrafts from different planets. In doing so, they become addicted to the spice and so reliant on it that they can't perform without it. So it shows like how similar that can be perceived as like current drugs in our day.
Yeah, I was like thinking caffeine.
Yeah.
And you feel like you use caffeine to get your job done, and then you can't even do a regular day without it. Can't even have a day off without caffeine. Yeah. I was like, so we're shooting this podcast pretty late. I think it's, what is it, almost already 11 p.m.?
Yeah, 11.
Yeah, and as we were preparing for it, I was like, I'm on an energy drink. And it's like, well, you're going to be up till 3, 4 a.m. if you drink it. And I'm like, but it tastes so good. And then on days when I don't have anything to do, I'll just like want to drink one for the sake of drinking one, sip out. And that's one small thing of all the many different things that have the same effect on us, whether it's
drugs, alcohol, fast food, sugar. Yeah, I was having a argument with one of my friends. Well, yeah, I guess you could say he's a friend. A person that I know. He was saying, so I was saying my argument was sugar is a drug. And his argument was sugar is not a drug. And I was like, I think sugar is the most deadliest drug. And he's like, I don't think it's a drug at all. And I was like, well, what do you mean? There's people that are super obese with diabetes and they're just dying at such an early age. How can it not be a drug? I was like, they don't want you to perceive it as a drug, or they don't want to classify it as a drug because they want you to fall into the same prey. And then he was just like against it. He's like, what kind of conspiracies are you watching?
How is he in shape?
Nope.
There you have it.
Case closed.
Culprit. Oh, you go. What do you call someone there? My leader.
If you've ever had a freaking dessert in America, then you know the power of sugar. Like, it'll literally control your mind, where like you have one sugar item, whether it's a drink. Like, people drink sodas religiously and they say that sugar's not bad for you. And they're drinking like 4 Mountain Dews in one sitting.
And then combine that with caffeine and all the sugar that they put in a coffee drink.
Yeah, those freaking Starbucks drinks are literally addictive as heck. So, but it's not classified as a drug, so it's not a drug. That's some BS.
All right, what else you got, friendo?
I think that's pretty much it for me. I was just gonna actually read the entire quote. So the entire quote, which is super famous for Dune, it says, "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain."
Wasn't there a part where it says fear is the little death before death?
Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. And yeah, we study like frequencies and stuff, and fear is seen as like one of the lowest vibrational frequencies that you can exist in. So if you're in a state of fear, you should try to change your state immediately. Like, maybe it's there to tell you something, but as soon as you get the message, try to conquer the fear. Maybe it's telling you that you aren't facing things in your life that you should be doing.
Yeah, and the Marine Corps would say, you freeze, you die. And that's what fear does. So it makes you freeze. That's kind of what it mentions in there. Fear doesn't allow you to think clearly. Another thing that we would say is, a bad decision made quickly is better than a good decision thought about too long, right? So, yeah, sometimes, no matter how crazy things are, it's like you have to make a decision. And in order to make a good, quick decision, you got to get past the fear. Fear is the mind. Yeah, but is there anything else?
Nope. I think we'll be doing part 2, which we're super excited for. When we saw part 2, we were like, this is the best movie of all time.
Yeah, anyone that says Star Wars is better is lying to themselves. Anyone who thinks Star Wars is better essentially is a nerd that just likes lightsabers. That's all that movie is. You can't sit here and tell me that the first Star Wars captivates you as good as Dune 2. I literally did not exist for 3 hours. I was Lisan Al-Gaib. The cinematography in that movie is absolutely bananas. I don't even know how they created the shapes that are in that movie. The lighting, everything about that movie is absolutely stunning and crazy to look at. Whether you want to talk about dialogue and story or whatever, then maybe. But as far as the way it was shot, Star Wars cannot compete. I thought the movie was awesome, and so I was a huge Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars, but to
get with the times.
Yeah, get with the times, old people.
Yeah, but if you're wondering, the director, he specifically created this film to be watched in a cinema, like a theater. Like, the experience in the theater was way better than you can watch at your house, for sure. That's one of the exceptions, because typically we just download movies and watch them at home because it's more comfortable. But this is one of those movies that you definitely want to see in the theater, because next level.
Oh, yeah, it was so funny too. Is a lot of people were like, "Oh, Dune's just a copy of Star Wars," but Dune was made before Star Wars.
Yeah.
If you really knew the background, it's there's people saying that Star Wars is actually a copy of Dune. It's so funny. I mean, who knows who copied who? A lot of times, people come up with very similar ideas. But, well, we appreciate y'all tuning in. Check out our Instagram. Follow us on YouTube. We appreciate you guys. And if there's anything that we missed or something that you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know. Send us a DM, comment, and we'll definitely love to go over it and talk about it. We'd love to hear your perspective, anything that you thought that was cool in the movie. Please reach out to us. We appreciate you guys. Thank y'all.